Psychedelics are undoubtedly the next frontier in mental health treatment. It's being talked about everywhere from a mental health standpoint. Psychology and psychiatry has not seen the outcomes that we have seen in mental health ever before in terms of pharmacological interventions. But what's perhaps more interesting is that psychedelics might be the next frontier in human consciousness as well. And for the entrepreneurs, for the creatives out there are many people using these types of substances to figure out how to get clear, how to understand their purpose, and how to figure out how to move forward in a way that is actually driving an impact in the world. And so this talk is not only about entrepreneurship in the world of psychedelics, starting businesses that have to do with psychedelics. It's also about how entrepreneurs everywhere are using psychedelics to actually make them better founders, better leaders, better humans, better part of their communities. And the panel that we put together today is a perfect example of that. All of us are founders, are entrepreneurs who have also had profound experiences using psychedelics. In my last company, we scaled to 300 employees. We raised $100 million in venture capital, and I use psychedelics on an every 6-month basis to figure out what were my priorities. Am I still doing things that I want to be doing? Am I still driving the impact that I want? And it inspired me to figure out how to start something in this space. And so my name is Nico Skavaski. I'm the co-founder of Althea, and we're a psychedelic care navigation platform. So for people looking for psychedelic care, we help match you with licensed facilitators in this new legal market of psychedelics that is launching right now in Colorado that we're going to spend some time talking about. So what I want to do is start off an introduction by each of our panelists by asking them a light icebreaker question, which is, how have psychedelics actually had an impact on your life? So we can hear from them as humans first before we hear about what their businesses are doing. So first off with us is Sarah Lewis, who is a professor at Naropa, who has taught hundreds of people psychedelic therapy and psychedelic assisted therapy in the licensed model. And she is now founding a company called Memoru, which she can tell you a little bit about. But Sarah, to kick us off, how have psychedelics had an impact in your life?
Thank you so much, and great to be here. Psychedelics have impacted me in a lot of different ways. I've also used them for work. So thanks for bringing that in, right? For those of us, who feel like what we're doing on the planet and our work are not like inseparable things, I think they can be truly impactful, right? To really connecting to how we want to show up in the world. I also had a baby 3 years ago, and psychedelics have been incredibly important for me in postpartum period, connecting with my family. And at Memoru, this new company that I'll have a chance to talk about, one of the things that we really want to do is have a family program, and so be able to work with entire families. And so that might be family conflict. Many of us were on Strongly Women co-founder team, have used psychedelics in postpartum and kind of parenting and mothering journeys. And so that's something that we're really passionate about. So that's just a few ways.
Amazing. So next up we have Greg Shanken, who has a company called Gloss. They help psychedelic companies with marketing and their websites. But I think more importantly, Greg has been an advocate for the psychedelic movement in Colorado and helped really push forward. It was an ambassador for the laws that really laid the groundwork for psychedelics. He's also the co-founder of the Colorado Psychedelic Society. And Greg, what impact have psychedelics had on your life?
Thanks, Nico, and thanks, everyone. I was on a panel last year, today on the day, and we have such a much bigger turnout, which is incredible, and it's a testament to how this space is growing. In terms of my story, I realized about 4 years ago that I was kind of hitting a brick wall in my life and career. I wasn't feeling a lot of passion, so I went into therapy. And my therapist helped me see the price I was paying for being on SSRI medication for anxiety and depression. I don't condemn prescription meds, but I realized that the price I was paying, and I was feeling numb, disembodied. I wasn't feeling anything in my body. And that led me into my psychedelic healing journey, starting with ayahuasca in 2022. And coming out of that, I realized my passion, which is to serve this space. And at that time, I didn't really know how to do that because I was so new in it. So I just started leaning in. And that summer, I became an ambassador for Prop 122, which ultimately legalized psychedelic mushrooms here in Colorado. super exciting time to be here because it's now starting to roll out, and some of the other panelists will talk about that. But it really fast-tracked me into the space and just kept igniting that passion. And I just kept seeking ways for how I could serve this space. And after the legislation passed, my friend Erin Witter founded the Colorado Psychedelic Society, asked me to be a co-founder. So we're a nonprofit. We provide awareness, education, foster community around responsible psychedelic use. And little by little, and now it's 110%, I'm just completely devoted to serving the space however I can to help folks with mental health issues, ones that I've struggled with and that I still struggle with. I'm still doing the work, as they say. And so it's great to be a part of these types of sessions where we can have these discussions, because there are a lot of thorny issues that we'll get into around psychedelics, business, entrepreneurship, etc. So that's a bit of my story. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. So next up on the panel, we have Courtney Campbell, who is visiting us all the way from Portland, Oregon. So Oregon, of course, was the pioneer in our country of legalizing a psychedelic program. And Courtney here is a pioneer within the Oregon ecosystem, having started the first licensed service center where they can actually serve psychedelics in the Portland area. And I have been to it. I have journeyed in his space, and it's an amazing experience. And certainly one of the premier spaces there. And he had some exciting news about what he might be doing in Boulder too. But Courtney, how have psychedelics impacted you?
Thanks, Nico. Thanks for having me here. I mean, I don't think it'd be too dramatic to say that psychedelics saved my life. Like a lot of people, suffered from anxiety, depression, substance misuse sort of throughout my entire life, put on a bunch of meds. And then it wasn't until probably my early 30s that a psychiatrist that I've been working with had to move out of state, so I had to find a new one. I found a new one. He was like, "Man, you're on a shit ton of meds here. Like, what's up with this?" I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Did they help?" I said, "I don't know." They didn't. And so he said, "What about?" He's like, "How do you feel about getting off of this and into mushrooms?" And I was like, "That sounds like a pretty good plan." And so over the course of a couple of years, I got off of all that, got into a couple of retreats with psilocybin, and it, transformed me into, not transformed, it allowed me to be sort of the person that I was always meant to be, sort of the 18-year-old me. So that's how psychedelics have transformed my life. And yeah.
Courtney Campbell, 18 years old, sitting in front of you today. And last but not least, to my left here is Mikki Vogt, who is a therapist and is one of the co-founders of the Center Origin, which is Colorado's first licensed healing center in Denver, Colorado. So super excited for them to potentially be the first to actually dose legally someone with psilocybin here, which could happen in the coming weeks. So excited. Mikki, how have psychedelics impacted your life?
Thank you for asking me to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Similarly to everybody up here, I've gotten to witness the power of psychedelics both personally and professionally. Personally, found that it was, I experienced a really tough loss almost a decade ago now, and found that for years after that, no matter how much therapy I did and different approaches I took and SSRIs that I was on, would make progress in kind of regaining myself and my life back, but always ended up kind of hitting that wall where ultimately it was reflected back to me by one of my therapists that I was stuck in this place of grief and loss, and that everything I was doing really revolved around this one moment in my life that I didn't want it to revolve around anymore. And I had the really amazing opportunity to be introduced to a woman who at the time was working underground, providing psychedelic assisted journeys, and had an experience with her that helped me kind of see beyond that veil that I had not been able to break free from, and step into that expansive way of seeing and thinking with clarity and openness and hope. And in that moment, it was just this revolutionary experience for me that as a therapist, I couldn't help but see how this was kind of that missing bridge. You know, often we'll get to this place with our clients where no matter, you know, IFS, EMDR, CBT, all the different approaches, you can throw everything at your client. And there gets to be this wall where we know something to be true, but we can't break past the felt sense of what we're holding in our body, that belief system that ego, protector, whatever you want to call it, doesn't want to let go of and keeps you in that rigid place. And psychedelics ends up being that bridge where it connects what we know up here with what we feel in our hearts and allows us to move into this greater way of being, step into our authentic, truthful self, and be able to experience life in all of its glory without needing to numb things out. It allows you to process the information in a way that you feel equipped and capable, and makes me a better therapist, makes me a better mother, makes me a better wife, it makes me a better friend. It opens me up. I'm less self-conscious in my head, and I'm more connected with my world around me.
Who wants that? I do. So we are in a remarkable moment in the state of psychedelics, not only in Colorado, but in the world. We have so much scientific validation that's happening at the best universities around the world. We have these new programs that are coming live. Oregon a couple years ago, Colorado now, New Mexico's coming in a few years. Iowa just voted in some legislation. So it's happening fast. And with the excitement around like general society being excited around it, we're starting to now feel the entrepreneurial energy. I believe in the power of entrepreneurship to figure out how to bring goods and services to people in the best way possible. And that's the energy that we're starting to feel in this space. And so what I want to ask, and I'm going to ask Greg to basically give a lay of the land of what is the legal framework for psychedelics in Colorado right now? What are the licenses that are available, and how does the program work? Can I buy mushrooms on the street? Greg, give us the framework.
Don't buy mushrooms on the street. Don't do that. So the legal framework now at a high level is there are two tracks. One is called personal use, wherein we, over the age of 21, are allowed to grow, gift, transport psychedelic mushrooms. That passed right after the legislation was signed by the governor. So that's been in action for a couple of years now. The regulated model is what is starting to roll out here in the state of Colorado. And that is the track of opening licensed healing centers that is regulated by the state, wherein individuals over the age of 21 can literally go into a healing center and work with a licensed facilitator to have a safe, structured setting from which ideally you'll have a life-changing experience. It could be a very hard experience. There's a lot that goes into that, but in terms of the legalities, at a high level, that's what we have. The first license has been granted, so that's amazing. And we're so close to more licenses being granted. And that's for a healing center. There are different types of licenses for testing and growing that kind of get into some of the rabbit hole that we won't get into today. But that's a high level of where we're at in Colorado.
So to reiterate what you said, there's this personal use framework, which is not designed for businesses. We're not supposed to use that personal use framework and sell mushrooms in it or do guided journeys or anything like that. This regulated framework is designed for businesses. The Department of Revenue, the department in our government that regulates businesses, is handing out licenses along these lines. And the Department of Regulatory Affairs, who licenses professionals in our state, is licensing facilitators. And so both Mikki and Sarah you're a licensed facilitator too, right? What numbers are you? Number 6. It's new. And Mikki, what are you? 14. 14 is my favorite number. So they're facilitators. Sarah trains facilitators as well because they have to go through a licensed training program to actually become a facilitator. And then Courtney runs effectively as a clinic, but it's a healing center is what the term is in Colorado, where these facilitators will actually go and administer medicine to participants. Participants can be really anyone over the age of 21 who also don't have certain things going on with them, so kind of meet a baseline requirement, but they don't need a diagnosis. And so importantly, it's not that you are struggling with some mental health condition, but it's that you want to experience this for whatever reason possible, which could include the therapeutic outcomes, but it might also include spiritual or consciousness exploring or creativity or any of these other means. I'm interested, and Sarah, we can go to you for this as you've been in this space and starting these businesses. What is the biggest legal and operational hurdles in launching a psychedelic business today, and how have you thought about navigating those?
You said legal and business?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, gosh, there's so many.
And ethical, we can throw that in there too.
Yes. I mean, I was just asking these folks before, like, what are you all doing about insurance? If there's any insurance people out there, would love to meet you. Insurance, you can imagine, is challenging, right? This is a totally new landscape. And, there's things that we've learned, like we would have thought that having, clients doing an overnight and providing transportation actually lowers risk, and then finding out that in the insurance world and overnight, transportation, it's like, no, that's, more risk. So there's a lot that we're learning around that. And so as Nico mentioned, I was the co-founder of the Naropa Center for Psychedelic Studies, and we've been training clinicians and others wanting to train in this space for a couple of years. We had a recent separation from the university and reformed into this organization, Memoru, Center for Visionary Healing Arts, which we did for a few reasons, but one of which is that the status of psilocybin, it's still federally illegal, right? And so, as you've heard about, it's legal in the state under these certain parameters, but it's still federally a Schedule I substance. And so that became really problematic to operate our program under the auspices of a university. So to me, that's a major challenge, because don't we want our universities actually training clinicians to do this work? So I'd really like to see training programs in medical schools and schools of social work, schools of psychology. And there's so many clinicians who are interested, in training and learning about these modalities. But all of the universities right now who are offering, there's not that many, but the handful of universities who are offering, so I'm not talking about clinical trials, I'm not talking about research, but are actually training facilitators, which includes a practicum experience, right? And so that means that the trainees are facilitating under mentorship and supervision, which we want. Would you want to go to a healthcare provider that's actually never conducted a session before? No. And so this is a huge problem for universities to actually offer this kind of training. So those are just a few challenges.
I'd love to expand on that with Courtney's perspective, because Courtney started Chariot in Oregon year and a half, 2 years ago now. Yeah. So you've been boots on the ground seeing this unfold in the Oregon market, and we're all about to experience it in Colorado. And so I would love your kind of wisdom coming out of that space.
Yeah, the first area that I could think of, for you entrepreneurs out there, banking, a problem. Hard to get a bank account when you're working with a Schedule I substance. I had to go into, I was rejected by a half dozen banks before I realized that I couldn't say what I was doing, and then go in and say, I got this space where people are gonna do some therapy, and and they'd go, "Is it cannabis?" And I said, "No, not cannabis." And then they're like, "Okay, great, here you go." But still, they didn't know what we were doing, and if they did know, then they would shut us down and freeze our funds. In Oregon, we do have a bank now that we work with, which is wonderful to know that we can send our money there and it's protected and they know what we do. I don't know that exists in Colorado yet. Merchant services, another one we didn't have for a really long time, so we couldn't take credit cards online for payment. And even when we could, the fees were effectively like 10%. Insurance is a really big one. Like finding a space to have a healing center or a service center is really hard. It has to be owned outright by the landlord. So unless you own a space, don't have a mortgage on it, you need to find a broker in a city that knows of cool spaces where you'd want to open a center that where they're owned outright, and then that owner is cool with you doing therapist there, which is not, that really limits the options. Then there's the whole compliance regulatory piece, which is, I guess, different, but it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of forms, it's a lot of rules to follow. Product tracking, all the rules. And Althea has been a wonderful partner, sort of helping us with a good chunk of that now. So thank you. It's a big sort of weight off of our shoulders, but I think those are sort of the big ones.
Yeah. Well, and it strikes me that psychedelics have been used for literally thousands of years by humanity, but in our modern society, it's been used in this underground setting. And so many of us in the room, I'm sure, have experienced using psychedelics in an underground setting or a recreational setting in the woods with friends, but there wasn't really a business opportunity there that you could scale. You could certainly go the illicit route, but the scalability of it. And so now we're at the beginning of this new industry where there are actual opportunities to grow businesses, but it's kind of like there's a lot of rules. And so the early people to the market will have to fight through all of the rules and the challenges of a new industry starting, but they could also reap the benefits of being some of the first into this space. And a question for Mikki that I want to pose here is, as a professional, we have reputations. We put those on the line. I just started posting about psychedelics on LinkedIn like a few months ago, which was a big coming out moment for me. But like, what are the biggest or like reputational, financial risks that entrepreneurs or founders, and I ask you because yourself, as a therapist, you did that, you went through that journey. Like, how did you think about coming out and standing by this movement in psychedelics and putting your name by it?
Good question, and one that I think is really complex. I, as I had mentioned, had started working with this in my own private practice long before we had our regulatory framework. And where I think one of the operational legal challenges we have to operating in this space is not only do we have to consider, is it legal? We also have to consider, is it ethical? And then with this specific modality that we're using, taking it a step further, is that sacred, right? And there's 3 bubbles that we're really trying to look at everything we do through all 3 of those lenses and finding that nice little sweet spot where we're honoring all of those pieces. As a therapist, when I saw the power of what I was doing and how to connect this with people who really needed it, and we're dealing with treatment-resistant depression, really severe complex trauma, where nothing had helped them before this or had given enough relief. For me, it was an ethical decision. As a provider who has taken an oath to do no harm, it became a question of, do I withhold something that I know is probably the answer and play it safe? Or do I put myself and my business, my practice on the line and serve my clients and do my job? And I decided to do my job. And that was really scary. And it was, for a couple of years, a very uncomfortable gray area to be in. And it was hard to network, and it was hard to find other professionals to consult with. And so when this started coming, when Prop 122 came about, I dove in headfirst and kind of left caution to the wind and said, I'm there, I will speak, I will champion, I'll hold the torch, and whatever comes, so be it. I believe in what we're doing.
Love it. Yeah. That's a really great segue into this topic of ethics in general. And I think this is really unique in the psychedelic space because, first off, we're talking about people who are seeking this medicine out, likely because they're in their most vulnerable states. And then certainly under the influence of the medicine are in a very vulnerable state. But then also, this is a medicine that has been used and carried by traditions long before us. And who wants to talk about that? how we think about ethics in this space? That's a popcorn question. Is anyone willing to jump in on that? Sarah, yes.
Yes. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that, we've been talking kind of exclusively about psilocybin, right? But I mean, many of us are ketamine therapy providers. My co-founder was the PI on the MDMA-assisted therapy clinical trial here in Boulder, and all of us worked on the clinical trial for MDMA. And there's, one thing that I want to bring up is Indigenous reciprocity. And in our training, our trainings over the years, we had many Indigenous lineage carriers teach in our program, and not everyone was actually in support of the rollout, of mushrooms becoming available in Colorado. And some dialogues, that I've had with some of these Indigenous lineage holders have said, like, you have ketamine, you have MDMA, you have synthetic substances, sacred plant medicines don't really belong in a regulated model. Why not use those synthetic medicines? And so, I just bring this up just because I don't want to really create this like rosy picture, like, yay, psychedelics, and it's enrolling and everything's going really well. I think it's important to actually bring those voices of dissent forward and continue to learn. So this ballot measure, did pass in the state, but not by much. I think it was like 51%, 53%. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that, right? Some of those are the same reasons that I think MDMA-assisted therapy did not get FDA approval in August. I think it will get FDA approval. But, there's, like Nico's pointing out, some of these sacred medicines have been used in more ceremonial contexts for thousands of years. And it's important, I think, as we are bringing these therapies, into a regulated space and into the more mainstream, that we actually think about that.
Yes, thank you for that. And sort of story arc of this panel, we're getting into the deep dark stuff, but we'll come back up. The next thing I want to talk about, and Courtney, I think you'd be great to answer this one, is psychedelic therapy is expensive. It is, what we're seeing in Oregon is it's thousands of dollars to do one of these sessions, which means that there's an accessibility problem where it's really only the people who can pay out of pocket and afford it, because insurance isn't touching this space yet, can afford it. And how do you think about that problem in relation to where we are in this psychedelic healing movement, and how you think about talking to your clients about that?
Yeah, so I'd say on average, a session at Chariot in Portland is about $2,500, and that includes the facilitator fee, the room rental fee, and the mushrooms. When I opened Chariot, we were the first in Portland, and I had to determine, like, what is the market price for this experience? And I, based on my own experience and how much I had personally benefited from working with psilocybin, I didn't want, I wanted to do it for free. I raised some money from some family and opened it up, and, I was like, I don't know, how about $1,000? Let's see how that works. And then facilitators like, oh, I want a little more. And then I was like, oh, my bills are a little high, and now I got to pay for insurance and, X, Y, Z, and figuring out everything. And so we sort of, we're flexible. We asked clients what their budget was. We didn't ever try to take advantage of them, but, we said on the higher end, folks are paying this much. If your budget is less than that, like, we'll make that work too. We would rather have people in the space having a session, having a healing experience than not. And so we've largely still worked on a sliding scale. If somebody says I have $500, we'll find a facilitator that will do it for $250. We'll rent the room for $100 and sell, them the mushrooms for $50 or $100, whatever the math is there. There's been a few foundations that have stepped up to basically act as subsidies, like the Sherry Eckert Foundation. Althea has one going on, and that's been wonderful too. They're providing scholarships for folks, because the reality is most people don't have $2,000 to spend on this. And so you get a lot of folks that have the same mental health issues as everybody else, but just have more money to do it, which is not the population that we're like looking to serve always. So there's other ways to bring down the costs. Groups are one way to do that. But yeah, so we largely work on a sliding scale though, which has been sort of at odds with traditional business, not setting a price that is the price, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been so inspired by people who work in this space. They often start at way below what it actually costs, and then hit some reality and work back up to, oh, I got to pay bills. Yeah, Greg, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add some because accessibility is something I'm super passionate about because I hear issues with accessibility every day. For example, there's a huge psychedelics conference in Denver next month called Psychedelic Science, and I hear from folks who can't afford to get in and they want to get in. That's one example. But in terms of healing, speaking personally, psychedelics have changed my life. I'm a better father. I enjoy my career. I'm feeling passion again. And you can't really put a price on that. However, $2,500, $500 can be out of reach. So it's very refreshing to hear of folks like Courtney and Mikki and Sarah that I know address that. And then Althea addresses that with a fund that they've created, and there are others for other medicines that exist. But I also hear from this on the business side because I have clients that do what these folks do, and they have to grapple with what you're talking about, Courtney, because you want to heal and that you have to pay some bills. And that's the challenge, and that's why we're here. We're talking about taking ancient medicines that have been used for thousands of years and bringing them into a westernized, colonialized framework. I don't say that with cynicism, I say that with reality. That's what we have, and you're dealing with some of that reality. So it's something that we really need to be talking about, and ideally, the more Mikki's, Courtney's, Sarah's we have in this space, and Althea's as well, accessibility will become less of an issue. But a big one is what's been touched on is insurance, because these substances are still federally illegal, like cannabis, and so that could be a problem for quite some time. So we just have to all keep having these conversations and working together to enhance accessibility for folks who really need these medicines for their own healing.
I just think about the psychedelic epiphany. For those of us who have used psychedelics, there's often this epiphany of abundance and oneness, and we are all the same, and we are all love. And then think about how that fits into capitalism. And I'm an entrepreneur, right? I've been starting companies in this capitalistic world, but that's a struggle. And I think that one of the conversations I want to bring up here is this industry is new. It is nascent. It's hard right now, but what's going to happen and what we know from the startup ecosystem is that as soon as people start making money in it, there will be people to come in to try to profit from it. And not that profits are bad. We need those profits to reinvest in our business, but the profit seekers on a short-term scale can be damaging. And in a very vulnerable situation that these participants in, it can be damaging in a life-threatening way. And so how, as leaders in this space, as pioneers who are starting these companies early on in it, how can we hold ourselves and each other accountable to the ethical guidelines that we believe in as this market grows?
So I think one of the most important things, and probably in entrepreneurship in general, is approaching anything you do with a beginner's mind and realizing that, especially because this is a new emerging industry, no precedent, that the things you think you know, the models that we have had, are likely not relevant in this space. And psychedelics, very luckily, promotes a lot of creativity, which I think is wonderful. It's actually one of the intersections of three of my favorite things, the psychology and spirituality and creativity. And when you can be in that space, bringing all three together, considering what are the needs, how do I create a business model that's sustainable, that will continue to be able to help people, how do I keep my own food on the table for my children in doing that? And then how do I promote the accessibility for everybody that needs this? You're going to have to be creative in the way you thread that needle, especially when we are working in a Western colonialized model. We've got agencies that have made the fees very high to come into this space. And that is a reality. It's a challenge that we're having to navigate here in Colorado and trying to determine our services. And I think we all, in being the bleeding hearts we are, run into that piece of, we established a business model that was not going to keep our doors open and was not going to keep food on the table. And so then had to rewrite the model when we realized the reality of our costs. And thus then come up with some creative solutions, whether it be sliding scale. We've got a practicum pathway where people can get the full service experience as working with a facilitator in training under mentorship and supervision. And because they're doing their practicum hours, that saves a significant amount of the cost for the client. Also promotes really great training for our facilitators in training. So I think there's this pathway that we can bushwhack to create the accessibility piece while focusing on promoting the sanctity of the history of the medicine, as well as the compliance with the agencies that we're working with. There is that middle ground. It's hard to find, but it does exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've struggled with, contemplated, is like there's just definitely butting of heads of capitalism and psychedelics. Like they don't go well together. For anyone who's had a large journey, is bound to come up at some point to reconsider sort of like what's going on in the world. For me, now I have, I don't know that if I would have called myself an entrepreneur, during COVID. And now I have, 6 entities in, multiple states. We're trying to open a healing center here in Boulder, raising money to do that. And it's, you can be business, have a business mindset, but also, like this is a little bit different. It's just not like the same. The actors that are going to come in, that are here for the money, the gold rush, they're already fading in Oregon. They're, I think, this is about as woo as I get, but I think, the mushroom gods, have like sort of have our backs in terms of supporting the folks that are in this for the right reasons. And so, ethically, it's like we do this work because we believe in it and we want others to benefit from it. That doesn't mean that it's right for everybody, but, I think that the right facilitators, the right team, the people that are in it for the right reasons is sort of what's going to win in the end.
Could I just pull on a thread that you mentioned there, that the like high growth, money seeker, profit oriented folks that is starting to fade in Oregon? We are launching our program here. It's a room full of entrepreneurs who might be like itching to do something. Give us some examples of things that what came and went. Like what were the things that like we shouldn't do?
I wouldn't open up a large space that's catering to the Super Bowl parties and basically bros getting together to like eat psychedelics, because those people are already doing that, and they're not going to pay premium to do that in a regulated space.
Crossing off the list.
Yeah.
Damn.
What else has sort of gone by the wayside? I mean, that's sort of like the big one. Folks from cannabis generally don't work well in this space. Like, I mean, it's possible, but like, that's a very different thing. That's retail. This is a service. This is a client experience business for sure. I mean, I think the sort of like party zone idea was sort of the big one though.
We're gonna do questions later. So if you all have business ideas that you just are like, what about this? Like, keep those in mind. Let's that'd be a fun question and answer session. But Greg, you wanted to add on?
Yeah, just a very quick add on to the accessibility piece and the cost that you've heard. And I think you can all sense the integrity of the panelists up here. But if any of you here have heard 2,500 and that still kind of blows you away, even though we've talked about some of these aspects, know that we're not just talking about the journey, which in and of itself can be 6 to 8 hours, but that's not the entire experience. There is 3 to 4 to 5 hours of preparation to ensure that you're going to be having this journey in a safe container and be prepared for it, and even possibly be told that it's not safe. And then there's the integration, which is what many folks, and I agree, say is really the most important part, which is all of the work that you do to make sense of the journey that you have. And that is 3 or 4 or 5 hours. So when you net that all out, not that we're going to do that on a spreadsheet right now, but it's right. When you net that all out, it's not necessarily that much more expensive than seeing a therapist. Having said that, these price tags can be really high. So I just wanted to mention that piece. Nice. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. It's a different model, right? And so if you think about going to therapy, you go once a week, your therapist's hourly rate is $200 an hour. add that up in a year, it's not that different, right? It feels like a lot. From the therapist, the provider side of things, they take their hourly rate, they multiply that, they're giving up a whole day. And so, it's a little bit of a mismatch. In the MDMA assisted therapy clinical trials, we found that 67% of people with moderate to severe PTSD no longer met the criteria for PTSD after 3 MDMA sessions, right? There is, in some of the clinical trials for psilocybin, people have ranked their psilocybin experience as among the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their life. So this isn't something that you do all the time, right? It's a totally different model. I might recommend that someone, who's wanting to do this work for treatment-resistant depression, for ketamine, we recommend 6 to 8 sessions is what seems to be really beneficial, right? For psilocybin, maybe someone's going to do, 1 to 3 sessions in a year. And so it's a different model that doesn't easily fit into our current therapeutic model, right? Either for medicine or for mental health. But I think as a society, we're actually wanting something different. And so I do think, I think the change in the infrastructure will come in probably the next 5 to 7 years is my prediction, and we can do it.
What a lovely note to wrap us on. So we are going to move to questions. So think about those, raise your hand. I'll run a mic out to you and we'll do questions. But I want to touch on 2 things really quickly. Greg mentioned integration. It's something that we didn't really talk about, but in this space, it's so important and so often left behind. And it's really what psychedelics open you up to the changes that are possible. And so it allows you to kind of actually figure out what are you going to be after that experience that you had. And then the other thing I want to mention is if you look on your seat, you likely have a flyer for an event that Greg is putting on. So Greg, what is this event? Tell us about this.
Yes, so this event is in support of the Colorado Psychedelic Society, of which I'm a co-founder, and it's a nonprofit organization. And on Thursday, right here in Boulder, we're having an in-person event. The keynote speaker is Zach Leary. You might recognize the last name. Yes, his father was Timothy Leary. One of the pioneers in the psychedelic space, also a polarizing figure in the space. So he's releasing his book. He's going to speak to his story, which is fascinating. How he had to grow up in the shadow of his father, kind of left that whole realm, came back to it through Ram Dass, and now he is similar to the folks up here, completely dedicated to this space. He's a healer, so he'll share his story. We'll have guided breath work. Has anyone here done guided breath work? Oh, it's pretty awesome. And we'll have structured networking and food, and it's going to be awesome. We set this up right before this session, a 2-for-1. We're about 75% sold out, so there's 10 tickets to get 20 tickets, and I already saw some scans, so get those tickets. We'd love to see you there, and thank you for your support with that.
And if you're looking to learn more about psychedelics in Colorado, where you can access it, this is a great event to talk to professionals in the space. There'll be lots of licensed facilitators there, and folks who can connect you certainly to these service providers. So with that, what questions do you have for our panel? First hand I see here.
Hey guys, thanks for putting this on. I heard a lot about how the cannabis industry does not really jive with psychedelics, but what are some of the things that you can take away from that space as far as like, oh, insurance not really legal, like what are the things that we can learn?
I mean, one of the big ones is 280E, which is an IRS tax code that makes it prohibitive to sort of be successful as a business unless you're very creative if you work with a Schedule I or substance. So like for us, we have 2 entities. One is the room rental entity and the other one is the mushroom entity. Our taxes are way higher on our mushroom business, even though it's like 3% of our actual like overall business because you can't deduct anything. So I think, some 280E knowledge would be helpful. Maybe this goes retail at some point. I don't know. I think that if it does, then then that's in play.
Yeah, Mikki, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'm actually in a unique position up here in that the co-founder and CEO of the Center Origin is actually came from cannabis. Her name, Elizabeth Cook, actually over here, and she was one of the founders for Coda Signature, which was one of the leading cannabis brands. And one of the reasons were able to be the first is because of Elizabeth's knowledge when it came to banking and zoning and permitting and licensing and all of those things. And so that was one of the big daunting tasks for healing centers as part of the application process, was all of those compliance pieces. And because she did already have the knowledge, that is what helped us be the first, because we were able to get in a complete application with no holes in it. And for her, it was just a very smooth process where others were really upside down in it. So I think it's not a mutually exclusive realm. There is some crossover. I think in the business model, it's not commercial, or retail. But when it comes to some of the background logistics, I think there is quite a bit that we can borrow.
We have 5 minutes left. Another question.
Thank you all. First of all, I have one thing to say just about the universities. So University of Colorado Anschutz has just started another research on psychedelic mushrooms specifically for mothers in postpartum depression, and they are looking for volunteers. They're really just setting it up so you can contact the university here in Denver if you know someone or are someone who's going through your first year after birth of postpartum depression. They are looking for women to participate in their new research study. But the one thing I wanted to ask was the insurance piece. Does the individual insurance that you hold as a therapist, does that cover some of this, or is that separate from your private practice and you'd have to get a different insurance for the therapy, like the journeys? How does that work?
No.
A lot of people who are therapists who practice psychedelic therapy kind of want to go under a little bit don't ask, don't tell. Or sometimes they think that they will be covered and they're actually not. And so in our training, we do coach people to say, you're probably not covered with the liability, the professional liability insurance that you have. And so what we're finding is that, really specific coverage is actually needed for this work. Yes, insurance. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Thanks for being here. I'm a facilitator here, and I work with, I'm about to be working with a lot of people who I'm networking with and saying, like, in a room, in a facility, no thank you. So my question is, like, what are the talks of, like, healing centers being in nature or Airbnbs? And, like, can we see that soon, or is that, like, way far off?
You can do that. I mean, so when you submit your application, you have to show, is there an outdoor space? One thing, and Mikki and I maybe you want to say more about this, is that there's the state regulations, and then cities and municipalities can add or subtract. So our group Memoru actually worked really closely with the Boulder City Council. And in the end, at the beginning, they were going to add all these restrictions. And in the end, I think Boulder is the only city that's actually lessened some of the restrictions in terms of proximities to things like daycares and elementary schools. And so that's something that is happening. It really depends where you are in the state. There are some places in the state that are, understandably or not, pretty nervous about this and are putting on additional restrictions that facilities might need to go through. But there's nothing in the rules that would prohibit, like a retreat center or an outdoor space. Again, back to this, not to keep talking about insurance, but things like overnights are actually really challenging to insure with this kind of work. So, but there's nothing, outwardly prohibited, because I think the mushroom likes being outside. And so that's something we want to see.
Okay, and with that is our time. Before we go, a 2-word check-in. Go down the line, 2 words.
Feeling very grateful. That's 3 words.
Thank you. Appreciation. Yeah.
Thank you, Boulder.
Be adventurous.
I'm excited. Thank you.
We don't do the same drugs no more. We don't do the same drugs, do the same drugs no more. Cause she don't do the same drugs no more. We don't do the same drugs, do the same drugs no more. When did you change? Wendy, you've aged. I thought you never grow up. I thought you never. Window closed. Wendy got old. I was too late, I was too late. A shadow of what I once was. Cause we don't do the same drugs no more. We don't do the same drugs. Do the same drugs no more. She don't.